So I thought I'd do a little bit of a kind of a gear loadout, what I brought on this trip. You know, going into it, I expected actually colder temperatures. So I thought I'd be pushing kind of the limit of what I was bringing a little bit more. So I'll go over my sleeping gear, my clothing, and basically the cooking and the extra stuff that I brought with me. I basically normally use quilts, but I have, because I thought it was going to be cold enough, you know, the forecast was for -10 Celsius in like Banff. So it tends to be, you know, a couple of degrees colder up in the mountains and then in elevation also. I was figuring maybe it could have gone down to -15. That wasn't the case at all. But I did bring my winter sleeping bag, which is a Marmot Hydrogen, I believe it's called. It's rated at like -17. I've pushed it quite a bit colder in the winter when I, you know, use some other little tricks. Last night it was almost too warm. It's definitely overkill, but for example, my 20 Fahrenheit quilt weighs like 1.5 pounds, and this one only weighs 3 pounds. So, you know, the quilt, I really like quilts in the summer, but you know, once it gets cool out, you get drafts and things like that. It's sort of like fighting a losing battle sometimes. So I figured I'd just bring the sleeping bag. The penalty is 1.5 pounds of like pure feathers, which is a lot of warmth. The real disadvantage is the bulk. You know, here I don't have it compressed down. I don't like using a compressant, like a stuff sack that's really hard to get my sleeping bag into. I prefer kind of one that's easy to get it into, and then I'll squish it down in my actual bag if I need to. But I hate fighting with sleeping bags in stuff sacks. It just drives me crazy in the morning when your hands are cold. It's just a trick that I figured out myself. I don't know if anyone else does that. So this I can get into my bag and then my backpack, and then, you know, I can squish it in the backpack, and it's less of a problem when your hands are cold. So that's the sleeping bag. My pack is the Mountain Laurel Designs Exodus. It's a really old version. I think I got this in like 2010. It's pretty big. It's perfect for kind of this kind of trip where I've just got a lot of insulation but not much food, because it is a frameless pack, so it doesn't really support much more weight than I'm carrying. It's basically all on my shoulders, but it does the trick, and it's what I have. And I line it with a trash compactor bag. So it's not supposed to rain or anything like that, but you know, I think it's still just sort of good practice in case it were to rain. And also, you know, you're sweating and stuff, so it just keeps everything off your back. I don't know if you saw that, but it just swallows up this sleeping bag, and it leaves quite a bit of space on the side. My ground pad that I used on this trip was the Thermarest Neo Air X-Therm. It was actually the first time I used this. My other winter trips I've been using just the Thermarest Ridge Rest, and then sometimes another little self-inflating pad just for comfort. This is a huge upgrade. I mean, everyone sort of raves about the warmth. I use the Neo Air X-Lite for my 3-season trips. This was just as comfortable, if not more, because it's a big rectangle. So this is the size large. So it's 77 inches by 25, which is a big ground pad, which is pretty nice. It weighs about 1.5 pounds, which is not light, but for this kind of trip, you really don't have a choice. So that I kind of slide in behind the back of my sleeping bag. I don't bother rolling up the sleeping pad or getting it all into a little ball or anything like that. Again, it's just another sort of thing to fuss with. I just get the air out, fold it into a rectangle. It goes along the back of my pack and sort of gives some padding, because it's a frameless pack with there's no foam on the back of the backpack. So this gives like a little bit extra comfort. My shelter was the Yama Mountain Gear Seroform 2-person. I've used tents in the winter, and like real double wall tents, and they really just frustrate me. First of all, they're huge. I mean, it's like 1 pound. It's less than 1.5 pounds. I think it's 18 ounces. I brought it on this trip more because I consider it kind of a 3-season, like a late 3-season or shoulder season trip. In the winter, I prefer a big pyramid, which still is about this size, a few ounces heavier. If I bring a tent, it literally fills up half of my bag. And for what I get out of it, I'm still not sure. I mean, we're not talking about mountaineering. We're talking about camping somewhere where you can find shelter. So a lot of what like a mountaineering winter tent is marketed for is really exposed open areas. You know, if you're going into the Arctic or something, I'm not in the Arctic. Like if it was really windy or something, I could have picked an even more sheltered area. I sheltered up against these little trees here, which I think helped a little bit in the gusts of wind, but I could have found if it was really howling, I could have gone into somewhere even more sheltered or just gone down the hill a little bit. So that's the shelter. Again, it's so tiny, it basically just takes up a little corner of my bag. Forgot about this. This is the inflation sack for the Neo Air. That's what's nice about the newer models, that they have this. My older X-Lite doesn't, so I have to blow it up. It's actually quite a bit of work to use the bag, but you just don't get quite as winded. So that's that. My Tyvek ground sheet. This is sort of my standard 3-season ground sheet, so that's why I brought that. Again, in a real winter trip, I might have brought my full-size ridge rest on top of the X-Therm to act as my ground pad, as my ground sheet. The reason why I really like the ridge rest is just a great option also is the way I normally strap it to my pack. It acts as a really good seat. I can just pull it off, sit on the ground, and it gets me off the ground and it's insulated. And the other thing is that when you get into camp and you set up your tent, that just rolls out and then you have a surface that's insulated from the ground. So you right away, you're off the snow. So like that was one of the things that I sort of didn't have last night. I mean, I did have, I'll show that later, but I do have a little piece of foam that I use as a seat. So I used that, but it wasn't full size and it's kind of flimsy. I guess I'll get into my clothes. So I have I'll call it like my action suit with some mid trekking shoes. So these are some Morel trekking shoes with ankle gaiters, sort of stretch, not quite soft shell, but stretch pants, long johns. Then I have a merino t-shirt. I have a stretch hoodie, and then I have a grid hoodie. And like this, I find I can handle pretty, I wear this all the time. Like if you see any pictures of me, I'm always wearing this, and it works well. You know, I can strip off one layer if it's really hot. I can put my hood on, I can undo the hoods, I can put 2 hoods, 1 hood. I can go down pretty cool and then still have a baseball cap on, which I like. Every now and then on some trips I don't bring a baseball cap, I end up regretting it. So I'm gonna bring it all the time now. I do have a little beanie. Obviously, sometimes the hat is just not enough. So this is sort of my main action suit. So the other part of my sort of all the time action suit are some fleece gloves. These are by Mountain Equipment Co-op, and they're actually Polar Tech Alpha, which is a really interesting material. It's pretty thick, it insulates pretty well, and they dry out really quick. They might be double layer actually. They're just warmer than your standard kind of little gloves. I like them a lot. I've been using them for 2 years. I hope Mech doesn't discontinue them, because Mech has a tendency to discontinue things that I really like. So that's sort of my main outfit. On top of that, I have this really weird Anorak. So this is like LL Bean's like most famous Anorak. They've been making it forever. I got it for a few reasons. First of all, LL Bean makes they make tall sizes, which are pretty rare in Canada. The other thing is that it's a little bit thicker material than like some of those, like the Patagonia, like Houdini, super light, super everything shells. You know, if you're kind of bushwhacking and walking through like pine trees and whatever, this is tough enough. It stands up really well. I was a little bit surprised because it is a tall large and it's not that tall. The other thing is that it comes with this massive front kangaroo pocket, that's just multiple layers of fabric that kind of bugged me. So I hacked it apart. I took off the kangaroo pocket and did a beautiful sewing job putting it back together. It works. It's not the best. I wish someone out there, I wish a company out there made kind of a toughish, you know, like an Arc'teryx. Like Arc'teryx is their cut of their jackets, like the beta or whatever they're called. And, you know, these really nice athletic cut, but in a pure Windshell, a pure like full coverage Windshell with a little bit thicker fabric. To me, that would be, you know, it would be amazing, because I just don't think you need these expensive Gore-Tex fabrics on you all the time, especially when it's like your aerobic, when you're doing an aerobic activity. This breathes pretty well. You know, this was wet with sweat yesterday, and it's already sort of dry. I didn't sweat too much because it was a bit cool, but so that's, you know, that's my dream. My dream is that someone would make a really well cut, full coverage Windshell with a nice hood, with even like a brim. I just haven't found one on the market. They're all kind of they're too much aimed as being like 100 grams and super light. They're too short for me. So that's my Windshell. That's also part of my kind of all the time active suit, my action suit. The next thing is this. This is an old, I've had this for like 10 years. So it's a synthetic insulated jacket from Mountain Equipment Co-op also. I've never found anything like it. I don't know what the model is, honestly. It's a size large. It's a really big size large. It actually insulates really well. It's got a fair amount of sort of thickness to it. It's held up pretty well over the years. It fits me, which is also surprising. It's like pretty big, so I can layer under it, over it, around it, whatever. It's a bit heavy. It's like 24 or 27 ounces, which is kind of heavy. You could probably get a lot lighter in a more premium product, but this, I'm never afraid to like abuse it, so I just don't care that much about it. The next thing are kind of my extras, which are pretty minimal. Sometimes I even think about reducing this. So I have my sleeping socks. I wore those last night. I have 2 plastic bags. These are like the bread bags that you get at the grocery store, like where they have kind of bulk bakery, and they have sometimes like rolls of these. I just grab them from there. So what I do with these when I get into camp, I mean, I didn't invent this trick by any means, is you know, I switch out my cold wet socks. I put on my warm socks to sleep in, but then you've got wet shoes. So anytime I have to go out of my tent or anything like that, I put these in my shoes, and then I just slide my feet into these, and it keeps my socks, my sleeping socks, dry. Obviously, if you spent a lot of time in these, you'd sweat and these would get wet. But this is like, I put them on for like a couple minutes at a time, and it keeps my sleeping socks dry. I have some extra little thin gloves just in case mine get completely soaked. Again, in the winter, I'd probably have these, plus I have a really big, super puffy pair of mittens, just that are kind of my last resort emergency mittens. Extra underwear and an extra synthetic t-shirt. I've never put this t-shirt on, so I've never actually put either of those extra items on. I don't know. I bring them. I just always bring them. One day I'll probably not bring them, and I'm gonna get soaked and regret it. So this stuff I basically never touch until I get into camp. So it can go way at the bottom of my pack. I'll normally have it actually below my tent, but because I'm on the way out, it doesn't really matter. And then the last piece of sort of clothing I have is a really cheap Pertex rain shell. Again, I live in Canada, so it's from Mech. It actually is a tall large, which is surprising that I can get this. It weighs like 10 ounces. I got it on sale for like $70. I think it's kind of important to always have, I mean, if it started raining, that would be surprising, but I think it's pretty important to have one. I also wear it a lot. This is like a topic for another day, but I do wear it a lot in the full winter when I stop for breaks. I put it on first under my insulation and it's actually as a vapor barrier, and that's really a topic for another day, but it works works really well. So these breathable, waterproof breathable things, it's bullshit. They are almost not breathable. They work really well as vapor barriers. And it's cheap. It was cheap. Along with all of that stuff is my tent stakes. That I just put in my front pouch. So I'll get into some of the odds and ends. Poop kit with a trowel. Self-explanatory. I have some micro spikes. Also self-explanatory. Bear spray. This kind of trip I brought like a regular Nalgene bottle as my water bottle. I'll often, like I'm gonna do it right now, I'm gonna melt, there's no water, so I'm gonna melt some snow. It's a lot easier to pour things into an Nalgene bottle than like a smart water bottle. In like real summer 3-season trips, I do smart water bottles. But once I get into colder weather, I typically carry one 1-liter bottle and then one 1/2-liter bottle. And the 1/2-liter bottle is kind of my mixed drink bottle. This time I just brought a Gatorade bottle. I make my coffee in this. I have a kind of an electrolyte drink that I make in this. Sometimes I use like a 1/2-liter Nalgene bottle, like the HDPE Nalgene bottles, but I think I left it in Montreal. So those are my 2 water bottles. And in terms of like odds and ends, I have a mini inReach, and then I have just all kinds of stuff in my everything bag. Prescription glasses, and I have I put my sunglasses in there. This is sort of my emergency first aid kit. It's there's not much to it. It's mostly painkillers that I have that are pretty useful. Like, let's say you sprain your ankle, been there. But then some other stuff, Leukotape, some big, I don't bring like little teeny tiny band-aids, but like some big patch band-aids, some fire starter stuff, a whistle. Then just some other little stuff, nothing really interesting. Pen light, my giant safety survival knife, little compass with a mirror, balm that I'll put on my feet if they're getting really wet and kind of macerated. I think that's, people know about that. That's pretty much it. Oh, extra tiny tripod, that's snuck in here. But I always have this bag on even my day trips. My day trips, sometimes I'll take stuff out of it if I'm feeling like I need to really lighten things up. If I'm feeling lazy, I just take the whole thing. It doesn't matter. At least I just know that really everything's in there. And I brought some leather gloves just in case. I thought maybe I'd make a fire, like snapping branches and stuff. Leather gloves are pretty nice. In retrospect, if I'd really wanted to make a fire, I should have brought my little folding saw, which also saves a lot of energy. So that's my extra stuff. Trekking pole. I hardly ever use a trekking pole. I've had this trekking pole probably almost 15 years. It has a brother somewhere, or I broke the brother. But I need this for this shelter. So the Yama Mountain Gear Sierraform needs one trekking pole. It actually needs 2 poles, but I usually just find a stick for the back. The pole for the front's really nice because you can adjust it to the perfect height. The pole for the back, it doesn't have to be that long. It only needs to be like 2 or 3 feet, maybe 2 feet, and I just tie it at the right height for it to work out. But for the front, this really helps. And then in terms of stove and things, I just brought my MSR WinPro canister stove. I think this is a fantastic stove. I think it should be more popular. It's really good in cold weather. I really like that, people will say that you don't need, like you can get away with a jet boil or something when it's cold out. When you're melting snow, you have this on the ground, obviously, and you're throwing chunks of snow into a pot, and it, sometimes you're kind of squishing it. I squish it down with the lid and stuff like that. I wouldn't want to be doing that on a jet boil. I just don't believe that, they can really work that well when it's cold out. You start these stoves upright and then you flip it once they get going. Someone's gonna say, oh no, I use a jet boil for everything. Well, that's good. I don't. In real winter, I tend to use a liquid fuel, like a white gas stove, instead of a canister stove. Mostly because the amount of fuel you need kind of gets out of hand. I need like 5 to 6 ounces a day, and I can, for a few day long trip, I can get that in a 1 liter bottle. Whereas you'd start to need multiple canisters, then you're just dealing with all these canisters. It's almost nostalgic to use like the old MSR. I have an old Dragonfly. It works really well. I like it. So that's kind of everything. I'm gonna melt some snow, pack up and go. That's it.